So, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, um, I believe it was third or maybe second grade music class in elementary school, we watched this movie about Mozart. Amadeus, I think it was called. And he was a child prodigy, and he was obviously very, very talented. And at the end, he died young. He died young, and he died poor. And there was this figure that was following him, this figure that was cloaked in black. And I just remember being really scared. And I still have this eerie feeling thinking about the fact that when he was dying, he wrote his own funeral march. And there's this final scene where he's in bed, he's sick, he's writing it, and his protege, I guess, somebody that used to be kind of a not enemy but competitor of a more traditional style, became friends with him, and he's writing it down as Mozart is saying it out loud. And the scene transitions to his funeral, where it's, I think, in Vienna, and it's, dark, and the cemetery he was buried in was, the graves were like wooden crosses, trees, a black carriage. Not a lot of people were there, his family, and he was buried in a pauper's grave. And I have this image in my head of his body just basically being in this bag, like this canvas bag, and it's thrown on top of other bodies in a pauper's grave. So a pauper's grave, if you're not familiar, is back in the day, I don't know if it still happens now someplace in the world, but if you didn't have money for a plot, you would be buried in a grave. Not buried, but there'd be a big open hole, and they'd just throw bodies in there, and they'd put lime or something over it. I remember they shoveled some kind of lime on top of them and walked away. It was very eerie and scary to me. And so that's kind of where this all started. This study that I've been doing, really about cemeteries, and dare I say the D word, death. Things have scared me as a child, but I was still kind of interested in it. I guess a lot of children are like that. Maurice Sendak talks about that in Where the Wild Things Are, monsters, the monster under the bed. And if you read Grimm fairy tales, a lot of the stories before Walt Disney were much scarier than, what my generation was heard, in the storytelling. So, flash forward, okay? Nickelodeon magazine, I think. This was back when AOL just came out. Everybody had instant message. My username was Pillwin Girl. I went in all kinds of chat rooms, and websites back then were super creative. And I was thinking about this recently because I started my own business, and I was like, I want my website to kind of look a little retro, where it was, somebody really kind of put it together. There's a documentary I watched about, I think they were German, maybe, or I can't remember their nationality, but they were doing historic research on website design. And they talked about how older websites like that, this is before MySpace, required the user to really, we were doing coding and things of that nature. And, the sparkly background and the rotating letters and all that kind of stuff, that it added some kind of personality. So, anyways, This Nickelodeon magazine, a long time ago, you get it in the grocery store line, would have, like cool websites to go visit. And so after school, I'd get off homework, avoiding homework, and I'd go to my computer and go to these websites. And one of them was called findagrave.com. So this is like in middle school now. And I was like, I wonder where Mozart is buried. So findagrave.com, what it is it's this awesome website where you can look up almost anybody's name and you can see a picture of their monument, gravestone, headstone, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes it has information about the person. Sometimes it has like their obituary. You can leave notes, virtual flowers, all those kinds of things. And so when I discovered the site, this thing about the Mozart thing, I just remember thinking, like, I'm going to look that up because he was in a pauper's grave. I wonder kind of what that looks like now. Is it just a piece of grass or whatever? I believe now, I haven't been on it in a while, but I believe a monument has been erected. I don't know if it's at the location where he was actually buried. I believe his location is unknown still. But that's what kind of turned me on to this website called findagrave.com. And I've had other experiences along the way, in between, but that's what I want to focus on. So I recently, I took a year off of work, year and a half, to get my architectural exam process completed. I was born in 1988. I'm a millennial, and the reason I say that is because I read this article recently that millennials are the most educated, well, I say that, but I can't even say educated, that our degrees, right? I have 3 degrees, right? I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that, my parents, and I think a lot of people's parents, wanted us to have opportunity. That's what I was told growing up. If you get your degree, you're going to have more opportunity. So I was burned out by the time that I needed to take my exams. I had just completed my second master's while working full time. I had also got an MBA, and I'm super grateful for that. It's just, I had this period in my life where I remember saying to myself, I was going so fast. My life, it just felt like I was going 100 miles per hour, and it was like all I wanted was like the Range Rover and the house on the water, and that just wasn't me. I kind of lost sight of myself a little bit, but I said I don't want to regret my life. I remember saying that. And so I took this period off from work, and it took me like 8 months to feel rested. But during that time, I really desensitized myself to technology. I just felt like I was always looking at my phone. The tech neck, my arm hurt from sitting at a desk, and the angle of my arm hitting the desk. High class problems, right? But still, it was like I just felt like I needed a break from whatever. So there's various things I did regarding that. Like I took my calendar off my phone and put focus time on my phone, and I never have my phone around me. People will tell you I never answer the phone anymore because I really just allowed myself to unplug. During that time, the reason I'm saying that, I'm taking these exams and they're challenging. And I was struggling with them. A pretty goal-oriented person. If I have a task set out before me with some clear direction points, I'm typically able to accomplish it. I'm not trying to get 100%, but it took a lot longer than I thought. And so, a lot longer than I thought, and I was starting to feel lost, okay? I was starting to feel lost. And for some reason or another, I can't remember why I went on there, findagrave.com. I've gone on there a couple times. I mean, I hadn't been on it for years, but I had, throughout my life, I've kind of gone on it. If I hear somebody die, like I remember when Matthew Perry died, I looked him up. Or if I watch a documentary about Marilyn Monroe, I'll look it up. And the reason I do that is because I took this course in marketing, I believe, and they talked about, the way that a person believes, a person believes is going to happen after they die kind of defines how they live. That if they believe in reincarnation, that they may live their life differently, or if they believe that you're alive once and you go to heaven and it's more linear, then you're going to live a different way. And I've also kind of studied, I took a course in Tibetan Buddhism. They talked about what's called a sky burial. I do not recommend watching that while eating. But it was a beautiful thing where, the Tibetan monks, they go through a process called bardo, where they are in the house for 40 days. And, the family prepares them for the, cycling to the next life. That was part of the process. And then the sky burial is all about, their body is basically, I don't want to say hammered, but they use a tool on top of a kind of a mountain, flat spot on a mountain, and the vultures come and get them. And it's graphic, but it's very telling about what they believe. So where was I? Findagrave.com. I went on it recently, and I noticed that, I look at my grandparents, and they are buried in Hagerstown, Maryland, at this beautiful cemetery. It's called Rose Hill Cemetery. And so I've been to 3 funerals there for family members. Very distinct things about that cemetery that are just in my mind. Kind of the wall surrounding it, the entrance, the topography, the route you take to kind of get to their plot. So I'm very familiar with it. And now there's this new feature on findagrave.com where it will show, it's kind of linked with ancestry.com, so it will show other people that are related to that person kind of on their page. So I'm like, this is kind of neat. So I'll click on the, say I click on my grandfather. It'll say spouse and my grandmother's name, and I can click on her name. Then her page will pop up on findagrave.com, and it'll show her, her sister. And so it was kind of leading me on this trail. And immediately I realized, holy smokes, I have family. I've been to the cemetery. My grandfather died in 1997. So it's been a long time. I've been there several times. That my great-grandmother, who's one of the, I think, 5 people now at the family plot, her sister and her husband are buried in the same cemetery, just in a different section. And I'm thinking, how did I not know that? How did none of my family know that? How did that information get lost? So that was a question that I asked myself. And so because I was kind of lost and also trying to, I guess, a side quest of who is Kelly, I went on Ancestry.com. I did the world trial or whatever. And I discovered all of this kind of stuff that was pretty incredible. About myself. So what I decided to do, and this is based off a project that I did while I was at UVA. That's where I went to undergrad. There was this course called Architectural Preservation. And this peer and I we mapped a cemetery. So there was a small cemetery in Charlottesville called Oakwood Cemetery. And we looked up everybody's names in the cemetery, which, by the way, when you start to actually write down the people's names, it becomes apparent how many people are actually there. Perceptually, I think, okay, that's a smaller-ish cemetery, but anyways, I think something about pen to paper. So we wrote all the names down, and we went to like the town library or something. We looked at all the census books, and we got the addresses of the people that lived in the cemetery and their occupations, and we learned a little bit about each individual person. And our hypothesis, or I guess what we were trying to discover, is there a correlation between where people are buried in the cemetery and where they lived in town, what their status was. We did find, this was a long time ago, I remember there was a correlation about, people that were African American were in the same cemetery, but they were in a different section, which is obviously very significant and is very telling about the time. And that was in the older part of the cemetery, but still, that's just information that, I would not have discovered just by walking around and driving by. So the microhistory portion, I was doing an architectural project at Boston Architectural College for a studio. They asked us, there was a parcel in the north end of Boston, and they said, we want you to design a museum for a demographic that's not typically represented here. And Boston's history, there's like Paul Revere's house, and there's a lot really cool history going on, but their motive was, what people aren't represented in the stories that we hear all the time. So I started researching around the site. And this is an online program, by the way, which I think is one of the 2 online programs that was awesome. There was a project called the Big Dig. It was an urban project. And the north end is kind of this, I don't know the correct term off the top of my head, but it's separated from the main city of Boston by this, interstate highway system. And they did this project where they made some of it, that you could walk over with parks and stuff like that. I'm butchering it, but during that project, they found a ton of artifacts from these brothels in the area. So I started reading about it, and it was really telling about the time that, and as an architect, it told the story of what the North End was, which was kind of this, it's kind of like where I live, where it's coastal, it's receiving a lot of business people that are coming from out of town, it's surrounded by water, a lot of people like going through it. There's also a lot of local history. I remember there's a Italian district, I believe. I doubt anybody's listening to this, so I'm not trying to be perfect with this. I'm just throwing all this stuff out there. So the artifacts, when I was reading about them, they were hygienic things to keep, and that was part of, I think the marketing was this, this was a brothel that was run by a madame, and she, part of it was, the people that were employed there were clean and they didn't have diseases. This might be a controversial comment, but there was a part of me that just thought that, these women, a lot of the women that I was reading about, they needed a place to live, they needed a place to stay, and I do think part of it might have been, making sure that they were also protected. And that just kind of really got me thinking about that and their profession. And along the way, a professor who was at the Glasgow School of Art, he zoomed in and we were talking about it, and he said, "Have you ever heard of microhistory?" And I said, "No." And he was telling me about, I think it was like Boston in the 80s or something. The term came up where history, we hear a lot of stories from, the main players, right? The very influential players, and they're written stories in a book or however you read it. Microhistory is the concept that we learn history from the individual. I was just telling my husband about it, that it's like learning about the anthill from each individual ant versus just hearing the queen's story kind of thing. So I just wanted to introduce you to the microhistory concept and kind of the cemetery mapping concept before I get into Gladys. So findagrave.com, you can now request, if you're a family member or if you want to see somebody that you're not related to, that is maybe somebody that's influential, like a writer or an actor or something, you can go on here and you can request a photo. And so I was walking my dog one day. I had this in the back of my head, just like, oh, that's kind of cool, right? Walking my dog at the library, and the library's right next to a cemetery. I was like, let me pull this up here. I sent it to David's parents first because they take their dog to the cemetery to walk around. In cemeteries, I learned in a landscape architecture course, again, I'm going off trail here, were the first national parks in America. And after Sundays, we'd go and we'd have picnic with the family. I think just due to time, but also maybe, literature and movies and things like that, it became kind of a scary place to be. But imagining it as a park, and David's parents going there to walk their dog, they don't have any family there. It's just a nice place to be. So I was like, let me pull up this one chick, Gladys. I'm like, this is going to take me 5 minutes. I start walking around with Kingston. That's my dog's name. I'm thinking, okay, he's a dog. He's got a sense of smell. Maybe, like the energy is here. Like, like we're both in it. We're both in it, right? We're going to find her. Well, we walked around. He's walking all over graves and stuff. I'm like, we're there probably 20 minutes. We didn't see anything. But in that first experience, I realized how many people were there. I went back, I believe, a second time. My husband goes to the library to take pictures of birds. He's a photographer for fun. He likes taking pictures of animals, and there's woodpeckers there that he was taking pictures of, and I was like, let me go creep over to the cemetery real quick and be weird. So I'm walking around the cemetery again, and I'm noticing, as an architect, and as an architect who's working on custom homes at this point, I'm recognizing names, like big names, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my client's last name. Maybe that's their mom. Or I know that guy from high school. That last name sounds familiar. And the whole cemetery mapping thing came back to me. Back to Gladys. I have a friend. This is more recently. We were talking one day. She said, do you want to go for a walk with me? I said, sure. I said, this is a new friend, by the way. And because the world's a little weird right now, I'm a little weird right now in terms of, just trying to figure out my next steps, right, with my career. I said, do you want to go for a walk with the cemetery with me? She's like, sure. And in the back of my head, I was like, maybe, let me just throw this out here, right? So I've been starting to throw this idea out to people. And when I talk to people about the thing I discovered about my family in Hagerstown and some of the stories that I've told you, people's faces light up. Like, almost like a little kid or something, you know? I think there's a need right now for history. I think there's a need for local history at the scale of the town. I see it on the History Channel with some of these awesome documentaries they're putting out, that there's just like this search for identity. So she's walking with me. I've been looking for Gladys. I've looked for a couple times. I can't find her. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, let her kind of lead the way, right? So immediately she downloads the app. And I didn't even realize that she had done this. I'm like doing my spiel, right, that I just did to you. She's already like kind of walking around getting her, her system in place. Be it, hers was more like, let me meander around this kind of nicer section over here with bigger monuments, and then we kind of got into the area where it's I don't know what they're called, they're like ground plates, and we started getting more strategic and walking, kind of in a Pac-Man type way. And she said something to me. She was like, well, let's look at the dates, let's start looking at the dates and seeing if the plates that are around each other, where are people buried, is it related to when they died, And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense, that if everybody died within 20 years, maybe that's the part of the cemetery that I don't know how it works. I don't know. That's the beauty of this. There's a lot of questions. And I was like, that's kind of a really absurd thought for somebody that has, to my understanding, hasn't done the studies that I've done. And then she starts talking about the environment. She starts talking about how she wants to be, what happens to her after she dies. She starts talking about her experience with a parent that died. We start talking about it. And it was just this amazing conversation. I don't want to get into too much detail, but I learned a lot about her. And I learned about her, not just what she was saying, but how she went about trying to find Gladys. So my whole thing was more like spiritual, connecting with the chi type thing, like let her, the energy flow, whatever. Her thing was way more like strategic, subtractive, deductive. There were some guys digging a plot. I love these guys because it's just another day at work for these guys. It's what's kind of eerie but also light about it. They're both wearing the yellow neon shirts. It's just two guys, younger guy, older guy. They got a piece of plywood they put over the hole, and they've got a small like bobcat or small excavator or something like that. I mean, it's not very. It's a hole, right? It's a hole in the ground. And we go over. We're like, hey, we're looking for this chick. Do you know where she might be? And you could tell they're just kind of like, who are these weirdos, talking to us? Like, we don't know where she is. You need to talk to the office. I'm like, okay. And I've worked in construction, so I'm like, these guys they're just trying to go to work. They don't want to talk to two, weird people trying to look up a random stranger on their phone on a Wednesday afternoon. Like, why aren't these two chicks working, right? So we walk over to the office, which I've never been in before, but I've walked past a million trillion times. Very nice office. It smelled wonderful. It was white inside with blue, white leather chairs. The girl behind the front desk, she was lovely. And I guess the manager or the owner came out. He was wearing this, he looked like a referee. He was wearing this black and white striped, horizontal striped shirt with black pants, and I don't want to bother these people, right? We're not buying anything. We're not there for anything in terms of what they do, on a daily basis, how they make their living. But I kind of got the drift from him that I'm not the only one doing this, that, they've had he's aware of findagrave.com. And so we ask about this woman, and he goes in the back and he looks in the files. I don't know if they're paper files. I'm assuming maybe they are, maybe they're not. I'm not sure how it works at this particular cemetery, but he said that she's not there, but that it used to be a crematorium. So on Ancestry.com, I don't think it's on findagrave.com. It's linked, right? Those sites are linked. What happens is it's a public record, her death certificate, Gladys. And on the death certificate, it will say, their name, the time they died, the age of death, the cause of death. It will say, the spouse, where they were living, who, if there was an autopsy, who the doctor was, and it'll say, where they're cremated, or where they're going to be, I think interred is the word. So I saw in there it said Princess Anne Crematorium. So I learned something about the town, that it used to be something else. I don't know if it's still a crematorium. I believe it might be, but now it has somehow changed. So she's not there. She's not there. And it was still, I wasn't done. I'm like, I still don't know where she is. So somebody has requested her picture. I now have since seen that I'm not the only person that has looked for her. I realized after that I could not find her at that particular cemetery that another person had commented that they went to the office as well and she wasn't there. So my friend and I are talking, maybe documents could have been burned in a fire or something. I mean, there's a million explanations as to why we don't know. But my thought was, let me go on Ancestry.com and try to read more information about her, because what that site does is, it's called Discover, like helpful hints, where it'll present you with information and says, do you think this is that person? Some of it's from newspaper articles, some of it's from marriage records, death records, baptisms, censuses, things of that nature. So I'm just trying to get, a better picture of, does she have, who she related to, I was able to gather that she actually lived like 5 streets away from me, from where I live now. I haven't driven past her house yet, but she lived very close to me. And she lived, I think, with her brother at some point. She had 2 brothers, one of which passed away when he was young. He was in the Navy in World War II. She was born in 1900, I think. I read this one article about her that mentioned her brother. No, it was her brother's article or something like that. He was in the Navy and he was a casualty of war. And this image just flashed across my mind of her receiving that information. I think as an architect, artist, human being, it's this empathetic feeling of maybe what they might have gone through. It's an embodied feeling of pain for this person, that what happens to that when that person is gone. And it was almost like I wanted to honor that for her, to recognize that loss for her, even though I don't even know who this person is. She was a debutante, Southern debutante. I read an article about her debutante ball. her parents were, it seemed, maybe upper middle class, upper class. They lived in Richmond, North Carolina. I looked at their parents' monuments. They're buried in North Carolina. Very nice obelisk type monuments. I realized at a certain point with her, my brother's in the military, and we live in the same kind of area of town. All these kinds of things. I'm thinking, part of it is looking to the past at another person. Am I looking for myself, or am I looking for her? And it's definitely, there's been moments where the other night I was up there, and this is not something I work on all the time, but I was up there thinking, I gotta find this chick, because I've done other ones since then, some of which I found, some of which I haven't. And I kind of felt myself going into a place of like, it was translating. What I was going through in my present life was translating into what, I guess, projecting, or it was translating with her story a little bit. So in that sense, I kind of had to pull back, but she was cremated. The person that's made the request has not responded to the notes that the volunteers have made, but I'm still determined to find her. I think that she had 2 brothers. Both of them died while she was alive. Like I said, one when she was younger, one when she was older. It seems she didn't have children. It seemed like she was really close with her family. That she did marry somebody later in life. One interesting thing about her from the census report I realized is that she was a stenographer. And I'm just making conclusions here. I know nothing about her particular story, but during World War II, women were in America there's like posters of, we need stenographers. So in my mind, this narrative is being painted of, that's how she is, fighting. She's a stenographer. She was later a secretary. I don't know if she worked with her husband or not. I don't know much about her husband. I can't find much out about him either, which is usually the person that is going to leave me the answer of where, people are typically buried or interred with their spouse. It's totally possible that this person, maybe their ashes were scattered or something in that nature, but it just put me on this quest of, there's people out there that are lost, that are living. There's people out there that are lost, that are gone. And that by going, at least for myself, I can say this for myself, it has brought me a lot of peace, searching for her. But when I've started to take other people with me, and something clicks, and I'll do another one of these about a gentleman named Beverly that I was just looking for the other day, with somebody else, a different friend. And it's almost like during the process, we start telling our stories. We start telling our own individual stories. A lot of it is, if the person was, older than me, then they're starting to tell stories about their childhood. Storytelling, I think, is changed, and that there's opportunities now with technology that, tombstones don't have epitaphs anymore. But there's ways to figure out stories. Mine will. Mine's going to be freaking awesome. It's just going to say boo or look behind you or something. But the reason I'm writing this is, or telling this story, is because there are a lot of cemeteries that have requests, and if you look at the requests, The ones in Virginia Beach have maybe 1 or 2 people. I went to one in Norfolk, Virginia that had 256 requests. That was, I had to come up with a whole new game plan. Like, okay, it's 2 people here. We spent 2 hours looking for 2 people in the same section and couldn't find them. That there's not enough data there to correlate whether that's us or whatever. I do think that it's a mystery out there, and you walk out there, and I'm not going at night, folks. I'm not going at night. I'm going during the day, and I'm just walking around, and it's just this connection to the past. It's the research that technology, there's equipment now like ground penetrating radar where you can essentially and I learned this from Skinwalker Ranch. Love that show. It's basically, it's like a depth or reflector or something. And they'll go over battlefields or areas that, don't have any headstones, and they're able to create a map of, it's more of an archaeological study, I guess, of how many bodies are buried there. That more information is coming out about the past at an individual level. That people are out there that are looking for answers about their past, that there's information that, for me, this is how I see it. When I walk through a cemetery, I'm looking at these headstones, and I'm thinking, as a designer, right? As a designer, I'm thinking, man, it says a lot about something, the way that they're spaced, the density of the cemetery, the plate in the ground versus the headstone versus the size. It's almost like a little neighborhood in there, a little city. The type of stone, hand-graved versus the newer, laser-cut stone. It's pretty remarkable, the story that such a small thing can tell, and the possibilities, I think, for answers about the past. I'll end with this. The cemetery I went to 2 days ago is called Calvary Cemetery in Norfolk, and it's located off of Julian Street. It's a beautiful cemetery, and it's big. It's around 56 or something thousand people. Now, driving past that, I never would have guessed that number. Never guessed that number. But once you kind of get on your feet and walking around and you're looking for one person, you realize the scale of the amount of people that are in there. This particular cemetery, Calvary Cemetery, was a place for African Americans to be buried. I think this cemetery was started, the guy I was looking for died in 1949. It was started either in the early 19th century or late 1800s. These were where African Americans were buried. They were segregated from the rest of the town. I don't know if it's still that way. It was like that until the 1970s. There's a military section, there's an older section, there's newer sections. There's sections, the particular guy we're looking for, there are sections that look really old, but it's like it's like an acre with one, headstone in it. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at the topography. And this is just a hypothesis. I'm not saying anything. This could be, this is totally speculative, but I'm thinking, this kind of looks like an area, maybe there were people buried here that don't have markers, There was a yellow fever pandemic, and there's a tour. Norfolk does a great job with their cemetery conservation. There's a calendar of events. There's a tour going on September 29th at the cemetery where they take you on the tour of the yellow fever pandemic. And so my friend who was with me told me that there was this author that wrote for the Virginian Pilot, a series about the yellow fever pandemic. So I went to it last night, and I was talking, he's talking about it, and somebody asked about, where are these people buried? And I was like, okay, here, my ears kind of perked up. And he was kind of talking about how there's a woman, I can't remember her name, that there's a similar website where you can look up the lot location and all that kind of stuff, which Norfolk does a great job. The wayfinding system, however, in some of the cemeteries, it's not easy. It's not easy to find. And part of when you take a picture on findagrave.com, it provides a GPS, should the person ever want to go visit themselves. And that's not a count on anybody. It's just, I'm sure it's maybe it's the anticipation of, listen, people that are coming here know where the person is, right? They don't need to, but now it's more like, okay, there's people like me coming in that we're looking for somebody. Not suggesting that it changes, it's just, it's not as easy as it sounds to find somebody. I urge you to try, or come with me if you're close. But then the discussion, everybody in the crowd was like, yeah, like people kind of got excited about the mystery, I guess. Excited's the wrong term, but it was almost like we're all detectives in this little bookshop, and we are trying to find information out about this past, that this yellow fever that happened in Norfolk. I know little about it, but that a lot of people don't know about it. I didn't know about it. And I've lived here since 1998. That's on me, obviously, but I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was a mosquito until I went to the lecture, right? And he said that people don't know what it is. And then some people started saying, well, there's this area over here that they think might be a mass grave, right? So I'm in line with this woman. We're about to get our book signed, and it turns out I'm telling her about the ground penetrating radar, like I know what I'm talking about. She's a geotech engineer. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Geotech, right? Those are the people that I need to be talking to. It's just, this is an area of study that I think that is really relevant for our times, that in construction, you hear stories, and I've been on jobs where there's been, there's it's holy ground, that if something is discovered or if something is on the site plan, that, there's particular measures that need to be in place to protect that area, because we don't want poltergeist happening, right? But it's out of honor of those people and their stories. And so we're in a time right now where I think there's a lot of opportunity to explore the history. And maybe that's just me and my husband. We have both started to really enjoy reading about history. Me, World War II, kind of Revolutionary War stuff are the two areas, and we're kind of filling in the gaps now, but it's given us a place of grounding, I think, in a global society, that, going down a phone vortex on our phones, and seeing all of that stuff is great, right? But that it kind of disconnects us from where we are, which is here. And that there was a woman named Gladys that lived down the street from me, who was a stenographer. She had 2 brothers. And I just imagine, okay, well, in my world, when I pass away, I go to heaven, and I always imagine, like, okay, say I'm at the pearly gates, right? And then I'll end with this. I'm at the pearly gates, and there's 1 million people there, right? People die every day. And you see somebody, and you're like, hey, where are you from? And they're like, oh, I'm from Virginia Beach. You're like, no way. That's where I'm from. That happened to me once when I was in Paris in high school. I ran into this girl who I saw in high school every day. I never talked to her, but because we were both in a different place, far away from home, it was like we connected on that spot. It's kind of the same concept, I guess. So, anyways, this is just, I'm throwing stuff out in the universe. That's one of the things that's just been kind of a side quest along for me. And so, I can share more about it if people are interested or if people have stories. And I'm going to start posting some of the kind of the drawing analysis things that I have done, and try to get more people involved locally, because it's not I need to try. It's just, it's happening. I don't, it's kind of like I kind of just am starting to ask people, or they point me in this direction, in that direction. I realize this is a common interest for multiple generations of people. That it's not a scary thing. It's a community thing, establishing roots. So, anyways, I hope that you have a blessed day sitting at your desk or doing whatever you're doing. And I appreciate you listening to this. And if you have any comments or suggestions or questions or ideas or anything, I'd love to see it and to hear about it, experiences. And anyways, that's it. Thanks, guys.